Ladies and gentlemen, Ken has been absolutely incredible at helping to orchestrate this program. He's been working diligently with me from behind the scenes to program for diversity, to ensure that we're really exploring topics from many different angles. He's been absolutely incredible at doing strategic relationship building alongside me so that we could really make our program something to really be proud of. And it's just been, Ken, so wonderful to get to know you more through this process. 2 kids from New Jersey, and I really appreciate all of the grace and insight you've brought to this planning and curation process. Ken has a deep background in nonprofit world. He calls himself a nonprofit lifer. He's deeply networked. He's worked with Planned Parenthood, the San Francisco Botanical Gardens, where he was responsible for thinking about membership and what members of organizations like the botanical gardens and museums and other institutions want and what membership can offer and provide. And he's really uniquely poised to facilitate this next panel. And he's really done such incredible work at programming this incredibly smart, keyed in and forward-thinking group of individuals whom you're going to meet. So Ken, I've been looking forward to this moment all day because you've just been such a rock for me, and I want to be a rock for you in launching you into your breakout session. So much love, and we really want to give you a chance to set the context, and then we're going to screen some videos that'll give folks an insight into the work of our fantastic panelists. Over to you, Ken.
Great. Well, thank you, Megs. I really appreciate the introduction and the kind words. It's been so much fun working with you on this and helping to strategize and recruit folks. And this panel is a good example of that. I reached out to Indra, who recruited 2 of the other 3 people on the panel. And so I'm really grateful for her as well. It's a distinct honor to be surrounded by these museum leaders on the panel. They're going to introduce themselves after the introductory video, but I want to set the stage and stress the importance of museums and the role that all types of art have played, both inside and outside of museums, especially during the pandemic. So where did people turn to find entertainment and diversion when the pandemic hit? Well, with no live options, we all went right to Netflix or Amazon television, even video platforms like Zoom. And they are all fully dependent on art and the content that art provides. This is what visual, musical, performance art, this is what makes us happy and it keeps us sane. Yet the arts themselves are not being financially supported like these corporate entities who are making money hand over fist with their platforms. So for example, paid membership at the Asian Art Museum has dropped from 17,000 members to just 7,000 members today. But museums are not standing still. The Museum of African Diaspora has shifted their education department from doing in-person events, classes and workshops to providing over 200 virtual events over the last 12 months. Now that is a seismic movement, and anyone who's worked for a nonprofit organization or even can imagine what it was like to do that, shifting from the providing in-person to virtual is just stunning. The Gregangelo Museum has pivoted from an indoor museum, which was exclusive indoor, to an outdoor experience, so they can still provide their visitors with a live museum and performance art experience. So let's go to the video now to give you an initial overview of their work, plus the work that Vanessa Chang has done to provide access for people with disabilities. We'll then have a lively discussion from all 4 of our panelists and how they've pivoted and what makes the future for museums and art look like in terms of post-pandemic world. So
into this plan, so into rolling with this beautiful video, and really excited for the ensuing discussion.
There is no place in the Bay Area where you can see Asian history and culture on the scale of that is on display at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco Civic Center. The museum boasts some of the finest and oldest pieces of art in the world. 18,000 works spanning 6,000 years and every region of Asia. The museum just wrapped up a massive new expansion project, adding an outdoor courtyard and several huge new murals. But that art just teases people of what's inside. The official opening of the expansion on hold as the coronavirus limits museum operations. The museum closed when shelter-in-place rules closed museums across the Bay Area. It reopened to visitors in October, allowing a limited number of guests at a time. Knowing visitors could be cut off again, the museum is making some of their collection available online. And conversations about some of their most prized exhibits.
Mr. Avery Brundage, the future founder of the Asian Art Museum, bought the rhino.
And behind-the-scenes glimpses of what it takes to preserve this collection. The Asian Art Museum isn't buckling under the pressure of the current health crisis. They see the future reflected in their ageless collection. After all, many of the pieces on display here have already seen governments come and go, survived wars, famine, and yes, pandemics too.
No great art was created without a struggle, without transcends our limit, transcends our circumstances, and find the beauty out of a hardship.
Do you think about the power of representation and what it means for a young Black woman such as yourself to, be on the cover of books and to be in the media talking about these issues that you care dearly about?
Absolutely. I think that, for me, especially with the type of work that I do in the food space and the wellness space, it's so important for us to see ourselves as worthy of self-care and self-love and diving into food that nourishes us and brings us joy. Like, all of that is so important. And so, to have readers who are like 8 years old and readers that are like 50 years old and all the way in between, it's just so amazing and so humbling. I think that when I entered, the wellness space, I was really, really young, but I never saw, a Black woman or anybody like that at the forefront or, in the center of this conversation at all, let alone a young woman that I could look to, who's closer to my age than most. And so it's really special and just an honor for me to be able to do that and to kind of fill that gap a bit alongside so many amazing young Black women who are just killing it in this space of self-growth and activism. And, I get to feature a few of them in the book as well. So just to be able to do that is such an honor for me.
Artistic, colourful.
This magical cacophony of art.
Just what everybody needs right now.
You can't describe it, you have to see it.
You just felt like you're in a completely different world.
During this time, people wanted something that was more escapism, that was more playful, that was not so in depth, that was easy to digest. So let's just kind of escape reality and go back to our age of innocence. So this first Riddle, we're just going to think like a child. They just wanted to go outside and play, enjoy each other. So we created a whole experience that's sort of about escapism called the Riddle of the Sphinx. So what we did is we wrote an extraordinary experience where it's in the imagination of every guest who comes, and they get to see the art sort of transforming and appearing as part of the experience. We were doing a tour of the indoor of the house. It was a very introspective journey. It was a sort of a respite for people from that crazy rat race we were living. And on March 15th, we were just closed down like the rest of the city. Artists got up and left.
We can't do anything, and we know that people are out there and they're looking to do something.
One day I was out watering the lawn. I started visualizing some art out here, and I was just an epiphany and said, let's just work outside. I was looking at the health ordinances and all that. I decided, let's turn this museum inside out. And we started building. We put out a call out to all the artists. And little by little, organically, it started turning into an actual experience. It took some time. This happens to be Pan, and Pan has a whole story around him that you engage with Pan. We see a woman made of mirrors in a tub, and it was sort of about the empowerment of a woman. It was like celebrating the reproductive system, which you see is all in red, proudly reflecting it onto others, and to reveal a metamorphosis, which I think what everyone's going through right now in some sense.
I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Vanessa, and we are the curators of Recoding Cryptech. Recoding Cryptech was an exhibition that ran from January to February 2020 at Soma Arts Cultural Center in San Francisco. It featured the work of artists from the disability community and exhibited print, sculpture, multimedia installation pieces, as well as sound art. The show really explores disability as diversity, particularly a diversity of bodies as well as minds. By highlighting this sense of diversity, it also engages ideas about and explores new ideas about perception and new forms of perception, and how this can foster new and exciting encounters with both living and technological systems. In this sense, it takes us back to the political work of what we're trying to achieve in the title, Recoding Cryptech.
So our intention with CRIP was to honor and highlight both the thought history of the term CRIP, but also to recognize disability as a cultural identity, but also a political stance.
What the show is about is joy, possibility, and potential to understand disability as a diversity of bodies and minds that can invite new ways of being with each other, interdependence, and community.
Thank you for watching.
Great. Well, thank you for providing those video clips for each of our panelists. And I want a special thank you to Mr. Wah, who stitched those all together for that intro. You did a great job. So I'm really just inspired, as you all could see from those videos. I'm working with 4 great leaders in the space. The work is really important, and it's moving, and it has to continue. And so we're going to have a series of 6 questions here, try to move through all of them so everybody can weigh in on the ones that are especially relevant for them. Gregangelo, as you see, the third clip there was his is a live museum still. So the first 2 questions, he may not have as much input on here, but for the rest of the people on the panel, and Nia, let's start with you. In terms of the visitor experience at virtual museums and virtual exhibits, talk a little bit about how are you engaging your existing and emerging customers or visitors? Why is it important to provide access and remove traditional barriers, especially now, and how are you doing that? And tell us a little bit more about providing access to people with hearing, sight, and physical disabilities, if it's relevant for your museum. So Nia, why don't you start, and then Indra and Vanessa can chime in.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Ken, for facilitating this space. I'm really excited to be in conversation with all of you. As you saw in the video, MOAD is a contemporary art museum. We have a lot of dynamic programming and education, and a lot of our focus is on community engagement. So it was an interesting pivot, thinking about how do we continue to engage our communities now that we've shifted virtual. As was mentioned in the beginning, we were already doing a lot of programming in person. But since the pandemic hit in the last year, we've actually presented over 200 virtual programs, which was no easy feat, and it was a lot of kind of a learning experience. So we've shifted. Our very first program was actually an open mic series that I hosted, which previously was in person. It was in our lobby space, very communal, participatory. And so it was really interesting to see what the outcome was now that we've had virtual programs. And honestly, it's been really exciting to see our audiences expand. We now have folks who are calling in from outside of the Bay Area, across the country, and even internationally. And so when we think about our audiences and accessibility specifically, I think it's actually reduced a lot of barriers to access for the museum. I think traditionally people think of museums as places that often are harder to get into for specific communities. And so what's been really nice is to see how by doing virtual programs, we're including more folks who either physically couldn't come to the museum, even if they're located in the Bay, or now folks who didn't know about the museum prior to the pandemic, but now are regular attendees. So I think it's really important as we think about shifting just what opening up these spaces look like now that we are in a virtual context.
Great, thank you. Andrew, would you like to chime in?
Oh, well, Nia said so much of what we're experiencing as well. And I work in the education department at the Asian Art Museum. I'm responsible for adult programming, and my team, my education department, were like the first folks to transition to virtual right kind of within a month, and then other departments followed suit. But what we found also is the pandemic coinciding with the recent civil rights movement has meant a real come to Jesus moment for museums. Museums are being challenged really deeply about accessibility, about elitism, and about social justice and equity and access. And so we had already started that work, but it's really helped propel us into the work being really institutionalized and prioritized. And I would just want to say, honoring the people hundreds of Black folks in our community whose lives were taken, I just want to say, this is honoring them. And we're really looking at the troubling history of our museum. The man whose collection gave rise to our museum was really problematic, really racist, and we have been mounting public programs to address it and removing references to him. And so a lot of our virtual programming is addressing, we're doing a lot of workshops on everything from microaggression to eugenics. And I want to say, not everybody's happy about it. I got challenged by a member the other day who said, what has eugenics got to do with Asian art? And so we're just trying to stand by our work, that this is critical work, and it's high time. So our virtual programming is really exciting. We're partnering with a huge range of partners that help bring new people to the museum: Longmore Institute for Disability, the Tenderloin Museum, Queer Women of Color Media Arts Project, and MOAD as well. And really helping us extend our reach. And though we've lost membership, that means money, but doesn't make me all that sad, because we're reaching new audiences, and that's what it's about. That's what my work's about. I don't know if I answered your question, Ken, but you can circle back to me later.
No, you hit some great points. Thank you, Indra. Nia, you want to talk a little bit about access, especially when it comes to people with disabilities, and what you've done historically and how you see that access being expanded? I'm sorry, I meant Vanessa.
Sure.
My mistake.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. Well, first I'd like to highlight that there's really a few different ways of thinking about access when it comes to disability, and a major approach that people take, particularly with respect to museums and galleries spaces, is that of best practice. Certain kinds of display heights, audio description, the size of text, some work in tactile images. I know the Asian Art Museum has done some interesting work in this space. So that's the kind of standard best practice approach. What I'm really interested in, what we're trying to do at our show, is to think about access as a creative practice and one that is an ongoing dialogue. So in doing the work around the show that you saw a little bit of, and shout out to my longtime collaborator, Lindsay, access became a really interesting creative parameter for a lot of the artists, because it's not something that, it's just not quite done, and sometimes access needs hit up against each other. Sometimes we had an installation in the show which an artist wanted to have these stereoscopic viewers hanging for this immersive installation, and that's great. So we had to think about hanging them at different heights. So maybe someone who's a wheelchair user could use them, and then someone else who's like could also use them. But then when you're thinking about blind visitors, they don't want to have something just hanging in the air that they're going to walk into. So it really kind of requires thinking creatively and in dialogue with the people you want to serve. And so it led to some really interesting solutions with the artists we were working, and it became this kind of aesthetic parameter, where artists are thinking about how to integrate those issues and sort of integrating that service to diverse kinds of bodies and embodiments in the work that they're doing. So in terms of like moving access online, I think we really need to think about it in the same way. There's a lot of standard practice, like closed captioning, audio description, making sure that your websites and maybe your virtual galleries are accessible to screen readers. And there's so many challenges here. What that really means, though, is really centering the experience of the people that you're serving and continuing to have them from part of that conversation from the beginning. So you're not just trying to fix this work and trying to fix a website or trying to fix a virtual exhibition as a patch later. And it can lead to something that's really beautiful, and it can lead to like really expansive possibilities as well in terms of what that work is. And it's ongoing. The work never stops.
Great, thank you. Indra, I'd like to start with you on the next question regarding pivoting in this pandemic in terms of decision-making around programming. Can you tell us a little bit about the thought process and the strategy that the Asian Art Museum has taken on?
Pretty quickly after the pandemic hit, I was one of the first people. I somehow got a message by osmosis. I don't even know who said it to me. And they were like, start doing virtual programming. But I also had a lot of on-site programs already scheduled. So I had to make a lot of quick decisions about who could shift to virtual and who couldn't, and then also supplementing and building up. So it was a really stressful and lonely time. I was working a good 14-hour days for months, and it was exhausting, and plus dealing with my own emotions around the pandemic. So it was hard, but it's been really rich and rewarding. And now a whole bunch of us are programming. There's today, this afternoon, there's a program somebody's doing. So it's definitely caught on at the museum. It's a big deal.
Great. And Nia, I mentioned in my intro how you've shifted, especially your education department, from in-person activities and trainings and sessions into virtual, over 200. Tell us a little bit about how that happened, and internally, how was that received by your colleagues?
Yeah, absolutely. So prior to the pandemic, our education department focused mostly on kind of K through 8 grade programming in the galleries. We do have a robust public programs department, which is separate from education. But actually in this pandemic, both departments now have been presenting virtual programs. So it is unique that education is now joining us in hosting. We have different artist studio visits as well as virtual tours, which previously weren't existing programs. At the very beginning of the pandemic, as I mentioned, our open mic program was our very first virtual program. And it was something I had already scheduled. It was already in our calendar, and the date was approaching, and I was trying to decide, like, I think it's worth still organizing this event, but what does that look like? So it was truly kind of learn as you go. We hosted on Zoom. It was a meeting style. I had to facilitate it, and honestly, it's been kind of a blueprint for the programming that we've done. I think seeing an audience of over 80 people at that very first virtual event was a really positive sign for us. But even so, it's hard to continue, like, schedule out our programming just because we have to be responsive and adaptive and think on our feet. But I think now that we have a lot more support internally, now that our whole nother department beyond public programs is helping present these events, it's actually kind of spread out that workload. And so we're able to address different audiences with the programs that we're presenting. So I do see this as something that also will continue post-pandemic as well, just because of the success of it and the new audiences that we're being able to reach.
Great, thank you, Nia. I want to shift now to live museum experiences. And the only one of the four of you that is doing that, where the customers are still coming and visitors to the museum, is Gregangelo. And I've also been ignoring you the first two questions, Gregangelo. So this is your platform. But before you start, I went to visit his museum on Thursday. And there's a rich history of Egyptian art and influence on a lot of the exhibits. So I brought this out. If anyone on the panel know what this is or who this is? This is William. He's the unofficial mascot of the Metropolitan Museum, and he was found in a tomb, a much larger one. This isn't the original, back in the early 1900s. And my first job was 5 blocks away from the Met in New York. And after I was inspired by your museum and the work that you did, I went and found William. And so anyway, William is here to say hi.
Hi, William.
But Angelo, when I came to visit you, you had artists doing installations while you were there. So if you could talk a little bit about both the in-person experience at your museum, and it's outdoors now by necessity, and also a little bit about how the artists are sustaining themselves aside from digital platforms. That would be a really great start to this section.
Okay, that's great. Well, I'm Gregangelo. I'm artistic director of an arts and entertainment company that was housed in a museum called the Gregangelo Museum, where I am right now. It's been closed for a year in the interior. In fact, I can hear some paying customers right behind me outdoors. So that's why I'm stuck in the hallway right now. We're gonna move into a better scene. My primary job as an artistic director is to actually sustain artists. So we did switch to a virtual platform through a box office originally, and we did something called Art Talks, which was going into the kind of in-depth artist interviews with specific types of artists, anybody from aerialists to hair and makeup to tech people, people who collaborated in the past. And it really did not expand our audience. Our audience wanted to be here. People just want to be here. So we did turn it inside out. And we invited all the artists to come back, even though we didn't have the finances to do it. Everybody just agreed that we need to continue working and to engage with to continue to welcome travelers, to continue to contribute to the arts and culture of San Francisco, which was pretty much becoming extinct because so many people left. People were living in fear and anxiety and not really reaching out. And within about 6 weeks after the shutdown, the first shutdown, we started seeing people just coming up to the house, curiosity seekers that were just sort of peeking in windows and taking photos and walking through the gardens. And I just thought, well, I think we need to turn this into something. I'm going to walk into another room, so I think other people leave right now. What was the second part of your question?
It was, well, we talked a little bit about how are the artists sustaining themselves aside from the digital platforms that traditional or the other types of museums are using by necessity. You've got the option because you've shifted outside. So how does
take a walk in. So here's an artist right here who has basically step on up, Nick. Who's basically who's turned into a tour guide. I mean, we just keep training the artists to adapt in person, to be with people. You can see there's a tour group outside right now. And Nick here is an artist and performer and all kinds of things, and it's dressed as Gizmo. We try to be entertaining during what you're doing. And so we are doing everything we can to create new projects for them. We've got a lot of young studio artists. Why don't we turn the camera? Coming in because the school's closed, they can no longer work. We opened about 15 studios outside around the house in our neighbors' garages, driveways, public easements. Everyone gives permission to do it. We continued to make payments to the artists because we couldn't pay them full salaries. And then we started producing shows, and that's how we were able to make money. We started using the outside of the house as an actual theater, and we built 9 installations in which there's one character in each that people would come through, and we were able to sell tickets and actually pay the artists and keep them going. And it's not what we are used to getting paid, but we were able to do it and to continue doing our job. And it was, I was saying, sometimes we have a crew of 20 artists, and because we were only moving one pod through around the house at a time, in one entrance, out another, sometimes we're just entertaining one person at a time. It was pretty miraculous. I always say this place is the Museum of Connectivity. We're in the Earth room right now, by the way, and I chose this room because the panel being talking about diversity. This is about the world. It's about the humankind. I like to call it humanity. The shoes from all around the globe. There's wood from every continent that people exist on. And this one's really about humans' hopes, dreams, aspirations, memories, love, all the things that actually matter to us. Nothing that are our actual currency. And that's what we're working on right now, the currency of love and desire and just wanting to keep connecting.
Great. Thank you, Gregangelo. And then to the other panelists, how are your museums or the exhibits and experiences during the pandemic helping to position the artists for greater visibility and success? Do you have some specific examples where the pandemic may have even been a benefit to them? Going once.
Go, Nia.
I was just going to mention, I think one of the new series that we've adopted is run through our education department. It's called In the Artist Studio. And so we've been able to highlight, this happens every other week, and we highlight different artists, and it's an hour and 15-minute conversation with them in their workspace, and they actually really get to dive into their art. And we were doing in-person programming with artists, but often they were exhibition specific. In this case, our education department has just connected with various artists of the African diaspora, whether or not we've actually housed their art at our museum before. Often there is that connection, but in some cases, these are just, very dynamic artists in the community that we want to create a platform for. So I think that's been something new that I see now. Their work has extended beyond just who can physically see it in our building.
Great, thank you.
I would add something from Leonardo too. I mean, Leonardo is connected with museums, but not a museum. It is really more of a global think tank that's about fostering art, science, technology collaboration. And so one central pillar of this has historically been the artist residency. And we didn't really get to do that last year, but one interesting, what it has allowed is for trying to remake the artist residency virtually. And what that allows is collaboration and connection with people you maybe don't think about, kind of global collaboration, thinking about what are global problems. This particular residency was centered on eco art and climate change. It's a partnership with ASU. And so really kind of like centering different ways of thinking about like the climate and the environment and all of that, but centering like an indigenous artist, centering other artists of color, and then making sure that they have connections all across the globe to support that work.
Great, thank you, Vanessa. All right, the next question is to you, Vanessa, about the fissure between real or live gallery experiences and virtual galleries. What problems do you see between these two different experiences? How should we be thinking about virtual spaces to do something differently? And what are some of the possibilities versus the limits of virtual spaces?
Well, I think that, a lot of people have, and a lot of spaces have rushed online, and it's been a wonderful opportunity to increase audiences, but that hasn't meant a lot of forethought about what the different kinds of virtual spaces can afford and what they can do. Oftentimes that's meant using existing platforms like Mozilla hubs, and that tends to have a very particular kind of aesthetic, right? You walk in, you're like, well, this is very clearly Mozilla hubs. I can put these photos of paintings up and sculptures, but I know where I am. And as well, there's an interesting initiative by a local artist. It's called New Art City, and that's like an open source gallery space that's starting to try and address that. But it's very clearly a digital space. What some of, I think, the challenges are trying to meet some of these accessibility challenges. In the show that we did, we were trying to make available artwork to touch, have like tactile images or samples that could be touched. You can't really do that in the same way on screen. So I think it was last week or the week before, iBeam, which is a collective in New York, had their conference, and they really centered accessible experiences, right? So thinking again creatively about access. How do you audio describe a work for someone who can't see, and do it in a way that's creative and can really reproduce that artistic kind of sensibility? And so I think that's what I see some movement towards, and this notion that how can we use what virtual spaces are capable of, and rich text and new media, how can we do that to kind of create alternative sensory experiences for people who have various abilities and disabilities?
Great, thank you. Anyone else on the panel want to chime in terms of the potential difference or fissures between virtual and actual in-person experiences?
Yeah, Gregangelo here.
Please.
Okay, yeah, I mean, our experiences, I certainly love doing the digital work to try to reach a broader audience, but the emotional connection that we're seeing, I can hear people outside the window right now, it's palpable. It just outweighs anything that we've been able to do. And we're getting so many repeat visitors now, and we're seeing families coming repeat times. I just heard a family was here today who came to a couple of our productions. We see a lot of laughter, a lot of tears, real emotions that are arising from people with zero distraction. I keep saying that the beauty of all of the museums and galleries is that people are enjoying it in a moment and they're immersed in it. Our place happens to be super immersive because that's what we do. The art here is actually immersive installations. It's 27 of them. So I'm going to continue to focus on doing the in-life, real person stuff, one pot at a time, one person at a time, whatever that is, while of course doing this. I'm here today with you all, of course, sharing it with the digital audience as well, who I hope it piques curiosity so they can actually have a place to come, connect, share their thoughts, share their stories, whoever that may be. So I've just found that with our specific style of artistry, the specific museum and the diversity of artists that we work with, that they want to be connected to people in person.
Great, thank you. Indra.
I will just say that I miss being in person with our visitors and our staff, but there has been some fascinating community built through some of our programs. I do a food series and I have chefs demonstrate cooking a recipe, and there has been in the past 3 that I've done this really fascinating community built where people are sharing hints, they're asking questions, or where can I get that ingredient? And I had for a Filipino chef, all these people were weighing in, oh, you should go to this market in San Bruno and this one in East Oakland. And so I put together a whole resource that I sent to everybody who came to the program. And it really did create sort of, which doesn't happen as much in real life. People come with who they come with. They come with their pod and they kind of leave with their pod unless they know people. And often at my programs, we do also hand out samples of the chef's food. So that does create an opportunity to have some interaction, but it's been happening. And I have to say, for visitors, I've done 2, and I have a 3rd film screening for people with disabilities, and hugely, that is so critical that we continue to offer virtual programs for people with disabilities. They can't come to the museum and they can't come at night. It is not safe. It is not safe, sadly, where we're located. And we're at the intersection Civic Center and the Tenderloin. I love the neighborhood, but I'm able-bodied and I can walk fast. And if you're not able to see or hear or physically move about, the museum is not a place for you to be at night. So we will continue. We're looking at a hybridization starting in May, where we'll have small audiences with live streamed programs. So we're embracing both.
Thank you. And this conference here has just the people who are on panels who I know or guests, they've been asking me and making connections with each other, something they would never be able to do. So there is that benefit that I hadn't really thought about until this experience today. Let's shift to our 5th question here. We all know that equity and diversity just makes things better. Given the reemergence of an urgency of civil rights and racial justice in this past year, how has it impacted your work and the entire museum field? And Nia, would you like to start on this one?
Sure. I think MOAD's in a unique position where, for us, we are always doing this work. just because of the context of the platforms that we create. We're specifically a museum that celebrates and features arts of Black artists from around the world. So we're already engaging in these conversations, but it is part of our mission to be a space that ignites these challenging conversations. And we do that through our programming and through our education. So we've definitely seen, in some ways, an uptick in who's paying attention to the work. I think it's a question of new audiences, which is important as we engage more people in these conversations. But I think museum-wide, we have seen museums trying to grapple with how do they incorporate these issues into their work, what areas are they lacking in? And we've seen a lot of actually, museum workers organizing just to hold their institutions accountable for the ways that they need to be better. And so I think it's important that, unfortunately, though it seems recent, but that there is more attention on these issues. And I hope that people are able to continue pushing these institutions, which have historically been inaccessible to many communities, push them to actually do the work.
Thank you. Indra, would you like to add to that?
Pretty much answered that in the beginning, but again, this is a time, this new civil rights moment has really, a lot of focus has been on museums, decolonizing museums, really, like it's the first time. I was telling someone the other day, it's the first time I can publicly call out white supremacy and say that terminology. It wasn't, a year ago, you kind of whispered it because you felt like people would come down hard on you. And now it's all over the museum world that we are really talking about white fragility and white supremacy. And we are challenging our museum to step up. We're an Asian museum, but we have a lot of work to do. And we're just embarking on an assessment, a museum-wide assessment, to ascertain where the most need is. It's called a readiness assessment that was developed from the Minneapolis Institute of Art. And we just hired a wonderful facilitator who's going to take our museum through that process, analyze the data, and we're going to start implementing workshops. I mean, we've already started. I've been doing workshops already on systems of racial inequity, and we've done microaggression workshops, but this is a institutional priority now like it's never been. And I'm thrilled because it's buoying the work that we've been doing. I've been doing my whole life, but that we've been doing in the museum for years.
Thank you, Indra. Vanessa, when people say equity and diversity, they don't think about people with disabilities first thing. Can you tell us a little bit about what that's meant in terms of the exhibits that you've been involved with and how you're seeing the shift in the last year?
Mm-hmm. There's a concept that's central to the work that I'm doing called aesthetic equity or aesthetic access, and it links to some of what I've already been talking about, kind of creating artistic experiences that are equitable. And the way to do that is to center disabled artists in the making of those experiences. So right now, one thing I'm doing with Leonardo is building on the exhibition that I did last year, which was centered on these problems of access. So it's called Cryptech Incubator. We're building a fellowship platform across California for artists with disabilities to innovate in specifically art and technology, but specifically with the goal of addressing aesthetic equity. How can we leverage kind of art and technology and new media art to create new experiences and new sensory experiences? And really central to this as well is this concept of the curb cut effect, which is this this thing in this core concept in disability advocacy. The curb cut effect refers to, what a curb cut is? It's where you have a curb and it's that little ramp that means wheelchair users can also ascend the curb. And it's kind of central to disability advocacy in urban spaces from the 70s onwards. And disability activists in Berkeley actually smashed their own curb cuts. And that was a major part of activism. And so what the curb cut effect is like, well, look, it's not just good for wheelchair users. It's good for kids with bikes. It's good for women pushing strollers. It's just good for everyone. So if we're centering artists with disabilities to innovate in aesthetic equity, and we have aesthetic equity in mind, just think about what kinds of sensory experiences we can have at museums. what can we touch? What can we hear? What can we see? What can we feel? I think that's kind of a really important way to think about equity, that it's in service of everyone.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Gregangelo, do you want to weigh in on this, or should we go to our final question?
No, actually, absolutely I do. I've never consciously sort of programmed diversity into our work. It's just always been that way. I'm Lebanese, Mexican, grew up in Chinatown, San Francisco. And the very first show I ever did was, I was researching the roots of many circus acts that happen to be rooted in rites of passage from around the world. So our first show was about that. All the artists were already in San Francisco. I didn't have to look that far. And then soon after, I started actually sponsoring artists from Mongolia and Latin America, because there were some contortionists specifically from Mongolia, jugglers from Mexico and Peru. So it was really fascinating. And now even today, if I look around who's here, we have one of the tour guides is from Brazil, one is Caucasian. We have a black tour guide. There's 7-8 languages spoken here. The tour guides in training right now will be doing it in Cantonese and Mandarin. But this is part of the experience that the guests get when they come here. They see a harmony between all these different people, demographic, socio differences, age differences. Just yesterday we had, I think, 3 trans people, a black artist, an older artist, a younger artist, and they're all working in harmony. And that's what the guests see here. And it's never been my real intent to show that to people, but as I watch people engaging, I think it's become so important to see this diversity of people working together for a purpose, which changes all the time. So it's important, I think, that all museums and cultural institutions continue to bring diversity into the group if it's not already there. We are lucky it's already here.
Great, thank you. And that's what I saw the other day when I visited. So that's wonderful. All right, we have 4 minutes left. I want a 30 to 45 second quick hot take on what you think the future of the arts and museums will be like post-pandemic. Let's start with Vanessa.
History of the museum post. Well, I think that there's going to be a lot more hybrid programming, right? I mean, the audiences we've reached through these virtual programs, we don't want to let them go, and we need to sort of keep doing that work and to kind of keep centering lots of underrepresented communities, to keep that expanding, keep that program, make sure it keeps serving this global community.
Thank you. Gregangelo, you.
Well, I've been seeing, I do a ton of work at public museums for public programs across the Western United States for years. And what I've been seeing is that people want more and more immersive, more connection with the art, more accessibility to people who have never been to museums. And I'm hoping that will happen more. I've been negotiating hard with a lot of museums when I do public programs to actually, or private events at museums, to open them up, some of the installations we build to underprivileged people in the area who couldn't afford it, who think that museums are just for the elite. And we've been very successful with that. And that's one of the things take a lot of pride in. So I hope that continues in museums. I've been working with so many, like I said, doing that. So I hope that keeps moving as in-person programming comes back, along with the hybrid digital work.
Excellent, thank you. Nia?
I definitely want to echo those thoughts. I definitely think a hybrid model is what we're going to be looking at, something that continues to be participatory as much as possible, that's global, again, accessible. I think as we look to what the future is when we do reopen the museum, we do want to retain those global audiences, as well as create a space for people in person to engage with us. So I think it's going to also be an adaptive process. We don't know what the world's going to throw at us. And we've seen over the last year, it's been a huge learning experience. So I think we just have to keep those skills sharp and those practices ready to keep adapting to whatever's next.
Thank you. And Indra?
Yes, I echo what everyone said, but for us, we have 18,000 objects in our collection. We've got to continue to make our collections and our programs all accessible online, and we've got to be creative to attract and retain visitors. There's, it's survival into the future. So, and we're up to that challenge. We've got to step up to it.
All right, thank you. So in closing, as a call to action to our audience right now, I want to encourage everyone to support the arts whenever you can. They are a critical fabric of our lives, as we all know, and no matter where you are in the world, we can say that. I'm going to encourage you to attend virtual and live performances, exhibits, and events. I'm going to encourage you to become a member of museums or make a donation to a beloved arts institution in your community to keep them going. I want you to share interesting performances, exhibits, and events with friends, people you think will really enjoy them. And then always be an advocate for the arts, flagging great art that you love, especially on social media, to raise the profile of these and your own beloved cultural institutions. So thank you for joining us today. I want to thank our panelists. You're wonderful. I've learned so much from you. And I hope that we all have a great rest of the conference. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken and Megs and everyone on the panel.
I look forward to seeing everybody's work. Thanks, Ken.
Yeah.
Bye for now.
Thank you.